Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to our new vlog. लास्ट व्लॉग में आपने देखा था कि काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें कंप्लीट हो गई हैं. तो लास्ट व्लॉग में हमारा मैकेनिकल सारा कंप्लीट हो गया था गाड़ी से रिलेटेड. और अब जो हम फर्दर काम करने जा रहे हैं उससे पहले हम चाह रहे हैं कि नासिर आपको पूरी डिटेल दे कि हमने जो चीज़ें लगाई हैं वो क्यों लगाई हैं और उनका पर्पज़ क्या है. तो अभी नासिर की आगे नासिर की वीडियो देखें आप क्या एक्सप्लेन कर रहे हैं. फर्दर फिर हम कंटिन्यू करते हैं.
So we have the two main lines in and out from the water pump. So up front over here, I think it's best to come to this side. So this is basically your outlet and your inlet, and this is the outlet and this is the inlet. Okay, so usually that's where your thermostat would be, but in our case we are not running a thermostat since it's a very big looped system and the radiator is all the way in the back, so you cannot control the temperature from the back to the front since it's a very long distance. So we do not need to run a thermostat in this application. If you're running a front mount radiator, I know a lot of people do that, you cannot delete your thermostat whatsoever because it's the only block that keeps the water in the radiator long enough for it to cool down. But us, since it's a very long route, so we don't need to have a thermostat in this kind of system. So these are the lines routed to it. It looks and functions like a normal pump, but it's actually an electric pump. So it works on 12 to 14 volts. And it produces the same capacity as your stock oil water pump does, but with the exception that it does it the whole time. It's not based off your RPM. So whether you're at 6,000 RPM, 7,000 or 1,000, it will keep producing 55 gallons per minute, which is plenty for our system. The other thing I was talking about is the aqua sump right over here. So this is the line coming from the tank in the back, which I said covers the loops in the system where you have oil pressure drop due to G-force. The oil basically moves away from the pickup tube. And this is what basically saves you. We also have a Mishmito oil cooler in the front, and that's basically connected to it. And we have an oil filter relocation mounted under the engine to make changing oil oil and oil filter a much easier task. I already talked about the engine yesterday, so I'm not going to go over it again. But this is the main fuel line that is basically coming from the back, and it comes up here, and it tees in and it goes to your fuel injectors. There's a few sensors over here that are not your standard off-the-shelf sensors, which are related to the link engine management stuff. So this is everything that we did to the car, and we also worked entirely on the suspension front to back. We have our final step, which we might do today or tomorrow. Not sure yet, but what we did is we preset the coilovers. What do I mean by preset the coilovers? So when you're buying a coilover, the coilover is designed around a factory stock car. So these coilovers are from BC Racing. They're not your like Chinese stuff. They're good coilovers, the entry level of that brand for such a car. And they're designed around drifting. But at the same time, they're designed around a stock car, which means a car with full weight. And when I mean full weight, I mean as the car, it came from the factory with the AC, with its front-mounted radiator and the AC condenser, everything, the dashboard, all the interior. So they designed the coilovers around that car. Now, if you want something that's specifically done to your car, obviously you're going to have to contact the company and tell them exactly what you have on your car. Now, with this car, even though it looks like it's mostly got it, it's still close to the factory weight. I don't think it's less than 100 kilo than the factory weight. And the reason why is because we're putting a much bigger engine, a much bigger transmission. There's the roll cage inside, which is, I believe, done out of mild steel, so it is heavy. So actually, the cage is probably even heavier than the stock interior. So, and then he has the front bash bar and the rear bash bars, which are big, hefty, mild steel bash bars. So these are also heavy. So we're definitely either in the stock weight or slightly less. So in that case, the coilovers, when they were put on, it's fine. It will work as it is, but we have to double check. So what I do is I like to first check the ride height around the car, make sure all the coilovers are equal. And obviously, when I say all are equal, I mean the fronts and the rears separately. And then we measure something called droop. Droop is basically how much your tire will compress, how much your suspension will compress once the weight of the car sits down. So if the spring is basically a heavy spring, the car is not going to settle a lot. If it's a light spring, it will settle a lot. where you can adjust the stress level that is on the spring, basically the tension that is on the spring, to bring the droop to the number that you want. In my case, I like to run 40 to 50 millimeters of droop in the back and 30 to 40 millimeters of droop in the front. That will ensure me having the fastest drift car possible. You always want more droop in the back because you want the car to be leaner in the back and squat more. So in our case, we try to put as much weight as we can in the back so that the car can squat and get the power down to the ground instead of just spinning the tires. I know most of you are thinking, what am I saying? Drifting is all about, letting the tires spin. Actually, it's not. It is entirely the opposite thing around. We are constantly trying to look for grip in drifting because you're at an angle, you're basically fighting friction. And what you want to do is you want to be able to get as much friction as you can going sideways. That's only, of course, if you're aiming to be fast while drifting. So Adeel is aiming to have this car as a tandem pro car. So in that case, you want the car to be fast. And believe me, maybe you haven't seen it in person, but once you see a drift car drifting sideways really fast, it is way more impressive than a car just, skidding along or doing a long burnout, because that isn't drifting. Drifting is controlling the car sideways at a high speed. At a low speed, it is just called a burnout. That's what you did when you stole your dad's car when you were young. That's a burnout. Drifting is totally something else. We're trying to maximize the grip everywhere in the car. So we want to get the right amount of grip in the front tires. We want to have the right amount of grip in the back tires. On my car personally, I run like an extremely grippy tire. In most cases, that tire will break the average car axle on the road. And when I say average car, I'm talking about cars that come from the factory with already beefed up axles, like a Camaro SS or a Challenger or a Charger, or something that is even more than that, like Mercedes C-Class 63s or whatever. These tires are capable of breaking those axles just normally driving in a straight line. So imagine the stress and the clutch kicks that we're putting. So yeah, we are trying to maximize the grip. Now, due to what's available to Adeel here in Pakistan, I don't think he can run that much of a grippy tire. But with the right suspension setup, we can make it as fast as possible in this setup. So that's where alignment and tire basically alignment and the coilover alignment comes into play. So we set up the coilovers to be a bit hard in the front. And the reason why is because the Wisefab kit that is on Adeel's car up front is designed around being used without a sway bar. So because of that, we need to have the coilovers at a stiff setup. You don't want the car in the front to be very wobbly. If it's very wobbly, it's going to be hard to control. So that's why we put it on a stiff setup. And we made sure that the lower arms on these car and the upper arms, since everything is adjustable, is within spec, both of them. And tomorrow we'll confirm that on the alignment machine. Due to me having some experience on the track where I crash and have to repair stuff, so I can kind of eyeball these things to somewhere around what it is right. For the average Joe or a beginner, it's best that you go to an alignment and do everything over there from scratch. Don't mess around with something before you know what you're getting yourself into. In the back, we just set up the coilovers. The tires, looking at the alignment from the side, look decently within the spec that I want. So I didn't mess with them. Tomorrow, I had to do some changes in the front. The back, I didn't have to do anything. Tomorrow, we will be doing the final setup of everything on the alignment. My pro car is a 350, so I know pretty well what these cars want and what they like to be driven around. But again, from driver to driver, it might differ. But I think with what Adeel is aiming for, which is a fast drift car, not just a smoky drift car. I'm talking about a car that can really catch actual speed going sideways. When I say actual speed, I think that what I mean is looping this around like your local track here in Karachi, he would probably be able to get a better timing than a track car if the setup is right. So that's what I mean by we are aiming to be as fast as we can in drifting. So that's everything for now. In a bit, we're going to attempt to start the car right now. I said this before, I repeat it. This harness is only temporary in place. This is the harness that was already done here before. I'm not comfortable running it always on this car since we've already put a lot of time and effort into this car. The engine is not like something fancy. It's pretty much a basic 6.2 liter engine out of a Camaro. I know they're rare over here, but they're not rare where I came from. But what Adeel spiced it up with, it was my recommendation that, you know, go for a stock bottom end and just put a nice set of heads and cams and an intake on it. It will do a decent 480 to 520, somewhere around that, depending on the type of fuel we can get into it, somewhere around that power, and it will be reliable. So, you know, having a reliable car is much better than having a car that will run once a year. The other thing is because I asked him about the competition available over here, and it doesn't seem like there's anyone that's going to have a car that is up to this level or something that is built this well for a while. And I think with Adeel doing this car, he's probably going to inspire others to do something else. And if he decides to, you know, push the limit on this engine in the future, there are many stuff that we can do. But the important thing is we have the foundation done. And then in the future, if he wants to swap out the engine for a stronger LS, I don't think he's going to be moving away from LS. So if he wants to do that, it's very easy. We can build him another engine in Dubai and then ship it over. And with the right harness and the right stuff on the car, like, I mean, the basics have been done in a good way. For example, the clutch on this car is a Tilton twin plate 246 or a 247, I believe. What I mean by 247 and 246 is the diameter of the disc is 246 millimeters. So this clutch is actually rated to handle anywhere between 800 to 1,200 wheels. So he's already invested in the right parts to keep him moving on without having to change anything later on down the line. The fuel tank is ready to hold like 1,000 horsepower. He just has to add a fuel pump in there, and with his mechanical mirror over here learning how to do the whole step, it's easy for him right now to do something that probably guys here in Karachi don't know about, but now, you know, teaching them and talking to them. This is general knowledge, but over here people don't know about it. So his mechanic, Adeel's mechanic now, Omer, he already knows everything that we did on the car. So he knows every step, and not only does he know what we did, he understands why we did what we did, every step of the way. So yeah, he can depend on him later on down the line. The plan for me coming over here was to share this knowledge with Adeel, and for him to be able to create such projects in the future here without having to rely on bringing people from outside or getting someone to do it. I mean, he is limited with a few things. Like, I can't build this engine for him or this block over here for him in Karachi, because you guys over here don't have the proper mechanical equipment to build one properly. So that's why I had to build this back in Dubai. But down the line in the future, only like basic stuff like the engine stuff can be built outside and fully installed over here. So anyways, yeah, so that's it. We're about to start it. We'll see. Hopefully we don't run into any electrical issues. We're gonna first, whenever we're starting a new car or a new build, the first step you do is you check for leaks. So you don't just rush and start the car and start screaming and stuff. First step you do is prime your oiling system. So what I mean by priming your oiling system is remove the fuse from wherever it is that is controlling your fuel pump. You want to cut fuel to the engine. And you want to do that before turning your key on, because if you turn your key on, you're going to have fuel in those injectors. So before you turn on your key, you go to wherever your fuse box is and disconnect your fuel pump. If you do not know where that fuse is, or if you can't find the information for it, then just disconnect the pins on all the injectors. All the connectors on the injectors disconnected. And then go inside the car, turn your ignition on, and start cranking several times. Continuously for 6 to 8 seconds, 6 to 10 seconds. And the reason you're doing this is you want to get oil in through all the engine. You want to do that for like around 8 or 9 times. And this will ensure that there's oil that went through your oil filter, through your oil cooler if you have one, and then back into your engine throughout all your engine components, such as the bearings, rocker arms, your cams, all of that. You want to lubricate everything. You do not want to dry start it, because especially on a new build, all the oil is only in the oil pan. It usually will take somewhere around 15 to 30 seconds until you actually have oil inside your engine. And that's when most of the damage happens. So you don't want to ever start it dry. And that's another feature that the AquaSump avoids, because you can always open that valve before you start the car and lubricate your entire engine. So the first step is we prime the oiling system and we make sure that all the oil lines do not have any leaks. So once you're done with that and you know your engine has oil in it, then you can jump up to fuel. So the next step is you connect your fuel pump and you don't just start the car directly. What you do is you turn your ignition on, and usually most cars, they will have the fuel prime, which means your fuel pressure will bump up to whatever the factory setting is, and then a resistance will happen and it will shut off. You don't want that to happen. So what you want to do is you want to hot wire your fuel pumps. So you want to find a way to give power to the fuel pumps externally through like an external battery or something, and keep it on. And you want to keep that on because you want to keep looping the fuel and making sure there are no fuel leaks anywhere. Fuel leaks are the worst. If anything happens, you'll catch on fire. So you first make sure that there's no oil issues. You prime your engine, then your fuel. After that, if you are running an electric water pump, let's say in the future, you guys start building these things. If there is an electric water pump in the system, you want to make sure that you bleed the system properly and that you don't have any leaks also in your cooling system. Coolant leaks are not a big issue because they're not going to catch anything on fire, unlike oil and fuel, which can catch on fire. But it's always best to double check because you don't want to mix it up for another fluid. The last step you want to do is, which is another thing that a lot of people forget, is your power steering. So in my case, what I like to do is I like to lift up the front of the car, fill up the power steering reservoir with oil, and turn the steering a couple of times right and left, all the way so you can get all the oil or the air out of the system, and then fill up again, close that tank. Once you start the car, within a few minutes, you'll basically properly drain, bleed out all the air in the system, top up the rest, and you're done. So now, the step after that is you can start the car. The second you start the car, you always want to make sure that you have someone around the engine watching for any issues, any grounding issues, any electrical issues. You want to keep your eye on it for at least 10 minutes until everything starts heating up and going up to normal and your idle starts idling right. And that's it. In our case today, we're not really going to do that. We are going to obviously prime the oiling system. We are going to check the fuel. We're going to set our fuel pressure because it hasn't been set. That's a new regulator. We're going to fill up the power steering and, bleed it and stuff like that. But we're not going to keep the engine running more than 10 to 15 seconds. We actually do not have any coolant in the lines. And the reason why is because there's no point of then throwing it away, because we're going to have to take out this harness anyways and change it to the new one we're getting. So this is only to make sure that the engine runs and there's nothing wrong with the engine and so on and so forth. Yep, so that's it. Let's get to it. Can you remove the battery from down, put it up? No leaks, huh? Okay. Here's no leaks. No. He will put it back to 60. He knows. He understood. He's going to put it back to 60. No. Right now I put it 60 at 12 volts.